All right. It looks like we have a good group here. Welcome to Wednesday of Our Medicine. For some of us on the West Coast, it is morning. I'm sure other folks it's afternoon or evening, but welcome. I'm so happy that you all are here. Today we have a great workshop hosted by Cara Thompson. Cara is going to show us the ins and outs of building reusable ggplots. And so hopefully we'll get some good skills of how to use this reusable code and we can just make all of these great graphs. So this is a code along workshop, so feel free to use your own data, but Cara is also going to have some data for us all to use as we go along. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or if you make something that you think is really cool and you want to share with the group, feel free to put that in the chat. All questions are welcome. So Cara, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you very much. Let me just move my microphone a little bit closer. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Yep, brilliant. So, Andy's going to be here for the whole session, which is absolutely brilliant. So if you have questions or anything, feel free to just pop them in the chat and Andy's going to interrupt me if there's anything that I haven't spotted that really needs an answer there and then, and we'll try and get everybody unstuck as we can. The whole aim of today is to equip you to do more with ggplot. I've had a lot of fun preparing this and learning some new tricks, and so I'm sharing some stuff that was new to me that I've not done before, that hopefully will open up a few bits of creativity for you as well. I think in this day and age where AI can help us with the implementation, a big part of doing good data viz is just being aware of what's possible and being aware of what's helpful, which isn't always the same as what's possible, and we'll come to that in a bit. And just, yeah, trying things out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, being your own critic, seeing what you don't like, what you do like, and building on from there. So thank you so much for joining us. As we said, it's a code along workshop. I'll be sharing little bits and pieces in the chat as we go. Let me just open up the chat window so that I've got that nice and handy. And I will now share my screen and we can get going. Can everybody see a title slide? Yeah, we're good. Okay, I'm just going to move you guys over here so I can see a few more folks. Brilliant. So, creativity, accessibility, clarity. It's all about trying to figure out how much we can get out of ggplot as we're exploring our data, and how we can make it work. Kyle has commented on my fonts. Excellent, thank you, Kyle. I was actually wondering about changing the font, so this is helpful feedback. So we're here at Our Medicine. You're in the right place, hopefully. So let's get cracking. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I'm Cara Thompson, and I'm a data viz consultant. And I came into this through really just a love for patterns in music and language and a fascination with how the human brain makes sense of all of this. I took it into a PhD in psychology where I played people weird bits of music and weird sentences and saw how the brain reacted to things that were unexpected. And then I took all the statistics that you do in psychology into the world of postgrad medical exams, spent a lot of time interacting with surgeons who really don't like not understanding stuff. And learned that data visualization was a great shortcut to get them more comfortable with statistics, and then decided to take this independently. So the thing that really drives me in all that I do is helping other people maximize the impact of their expertise. So putting on these kind of workshops, the joy really is knowing that I'm interacting with people who are experts in their own field. And I get to just put a few bells and whistles onto the graphs that you're creating, and help you do the same for yourselves. Don't know if you've come across this meme before, but I kind of helped myself verbalize fairly recently that my happy place is taking people from what is a basic graph to something that looks a lot more fancy. And in doing this today, we're going to give you some reusable components for making your next fancy graph so that you put a bit of work in today and you can reuse that next time. And this squiggly arrow gets easier and easier with every time that we practice this. But actually, another thing that's my happy place is teaching people new stuff, because in the process of teaching stuff, I get to learn stuff. And so I've kind of put a little blue heart there in my slides, when I've come across something that's been a bit new to me or that I hadn't used before. And I would love it if you could maybe put something in the chat or use the reactions to signal, oh, that's new to me. I didn't know about that either. Just so that we can kind of see some of the joy of learning in community, and encourage each other that we're, what's new to us might not be new to someone else, and vice versa. So I thought we would, on the theme of the chat, let's do a few chat-based introductions just to get a feel for who we are, and what we're doing today. So I would like you to type into the chat where you are joining us from. Excellent. Good stuff. Okay, so a lot of US, a lot of Europe, quite a lot of Germany. That's exciting. A few from the Netherlands as well. Excellent. Good stuff. Okay, next question is, what time is it where you are? Here it's just after 4 p.m. Okay, we've got some 8 a.m. folks. Well done. Well done for being here. Appreciate you getting up early to join us today. Very good. 5 p.m. Yeah, we'll try and keep you engaged over that kind of dinner time slump. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next question is, what emoji would you use to describe your relationship with ggplot? This might be a slightly trickier thing to pop into the chat, but let's give it a go. Oh, good, good, good. Lots of love. Oh, a bit of scarediness. Someone's feeling cold towards ggplot. That's okay. We'll sort that out. Um, okay, good. Excellent. And someone who's here and eager to learn. Very, very good. So if this is you and you've not done much ggplot yet, or you're feeling a bit scared about ggplot, do not worry. We're going to create some stuff that looks really impressive by the end of the workshop, but we're going to do it in a step-by-step way, and I'm going to make sure that I kind of show you through the different steps so that you know exactly what's doing what. If you could tell me also what kind of data you work with. Are you working with kind of time series data? Are you mostly categorical data? Is it big data, small data, messy data? Okay, yeah, we all work with messy data. Excellent. Biomedical, good, good, good. So we're on track for that. Student data, yep. Geographic stuff, okay, very, very good. Clinical trials. Okay, so messy data. So we're going to do a little bit of tidying of our data today so that we can use it. We're using clinical data, but clinical data that I could understand. So I'm not a clinician, so I was keen to pick something where the hurdle to understanding the data is fairly low so that we can focus on the graphs as well. And somebody's keen to work with medical data. Well, you're in the right place. This is the right place to make friends, and hopefully, Kimberly, that can be you one day as well. And then the important question really for today is, do you like licorice? Doesn't really matter how you spell it. But no, yes. Yes, but watch out for the blood pressure. Absolutely not. Good, good, good. Okay, so licorice, we often talk here in the UK about something that's a bit Marmite. So people either love it or hate it, just as people either love or hate Marmite. Ooh, red or black licorice? Good question, Ray. I'm assuming black, but who knows? And Beth says Marmite is horrible. Yep, I actually quite like Marmite, but you have to use it in very, very small doses. Okay, so that's the introductions done. I'm also recovering from a cold, so if at any point I disappear from the camera or the microphone, it's because I'm blowing my nose or coughing or something. Do not worry, I will return. So the plan for today, we're going to make some graphs. We're going to make them look good. We're going to create some reusable components in terms of color schemes, in terms of a theme, in terms of bits of code that you can really just copy paste and use as you want to. We're going to hopefully equip you to do all of this at home or at work, probably more at work than at home, but who knows. For your own graphs, and then I'm going to show you some kind of new and newish ggplot tricks. So things that have come out in the most recent releases of ggplot that make things possible that weren't possible before. So hopefully that sounds like what you signed up for, and we're all on track. I'm going to be using the medical data licorice gargle data set, hence asking you if you liked licorice earlier. So if you would like to go ahead and try and install the medical data package, so install.packages, and then you'll want to open up your little quote marks and avoid typos. Um, that might work for you, and then it'll mean that you'll be able to follow along all the stuff that we're doing. But I'm going to explain what the data contains so that you can see how that relates to the data that you're working on, and you can adapt the code that we're doing to make that work for you. So, um, all the packages that I'm using are available on CRAN, which should make all the installations fairly straightforward if you need to install something that you don't have. I'm going to be using namespacing throughout the code. So that's where you show the name of the package and then the double colon and the function. I'm doing this for two reasons. One, it's just good practice. It avoids you loading a whole package, which might have some functions that interact with functions that have the same name in a different package, and it just gets a little bit confusing. But the second reason is just so that you can be really clear on what comes from where. Because I think sometimes when you're reading a tutorial or a blog post and somebody loads 12 packages at the front and you think, well, I only really want this bit, it's quite difficult to figure out what's come from which package. So the package that you're looking for is medical data. And inside the medical data package, there is a licorice gargle data set. So the only package that I'm not using namespacing for is ggplot, just because we're going to be using that a lot, and there's lots of functions inside ggplot, and if we were to namespace that, the code would get really pretty difficult to read. So we're going to just load ggplot wholesale and then see where we go from there. Feel free to code along and adapt stuff to your own setting if you want to. The slides will be made available on my website after today, as will the recording when that's available, and also the final code for the graphs. There is no such thing as a silly question, so if you have a question, please ask it in the chat. But the caveat here is that we're focusing on the graphs, not the statistics. So I'm the data viz person, not the stats person, and I'm going to be doing some stuff that is mostly to demonstrate a few ggplot functionalities. So you might have some, queries about whether the mean, for example, is the right thing to have done, but it allows us to show what we're doing. So hopefully that will get us through it. So yeah, the focus is on the graphs, not on the stats, and we will take a break halfway through because we're here for 3 hours, which would be a long time for me to just be talking and talking and talking at you. So we'll take a break around the halfway point and see where we go from there. Kimberly having some issues installing the package. Has anyone else managed to install the medical data package? Hopefully we can get you unstuck. No issues for Beth. All good. Yeah, the quote marks. So it might have pinched some quote marks from the chat that are formatted in funky ways because Zoom will have done something creative there. So here is our starting point with the medical data package. We're using the licorice gargle dataset, and if we just use dplyr glimpse to take a look at the data, we can see that we've got the patient's gender, we've got the BMI, we've got the age. The Mallampati score is basically how easy or difficult they were to intubate. Pre-op pain, whether they smoke or not, and then there's a bunch of stuff about how much they coughed and how much pain they have after the surgery. And what we're going to do is try and have a look at whether gargling licorice reduced pain and coughing post-surgery for our patients. So hopefully that's a story that makes sense to us, and we can go from here. So the trouble is that the way that it's all organized, everything is kind of numeric or double, and the names are not super clear to read. So we need to do a quick look around inside the package to see what's going on. So if you just type the question mark, then that will bring up the help page that's associated with this data set, and then you can read this kind of stuff. So we can see that we've got the variable treat, which is the intervention. 0 means they were given sugar. and one means that they were given licorice. And so we're interested in the difference between those two. And then pod 1 a.m. cough is the amount of coughing on the first post-operative morning. And again, that's rated from 0 to 3, from least coughing, well, no cough, to 3 severe cough. So we've got our heads around the data, and now let's make a graph. So we could try and do this, a box plot. Everybody loves a box plot, especially in the clinical world. We need a box plot to show the distribution. Um, it doesn't really work with our data, and actually here we've got a bit of a problem. So we're trying to show gender on the x-axis, but actually it's given us a 0.5, which doesn't make sense, and we had a 0 and a 1. We want to color it by treatment. We're not getting any color anywhere. And so this isn't really working for us. So we need to tidy up our data a little bit first. So I've called it imaginatively tidied data, and that's the data that we're going to be working with. So we're taking the medical data, and then we're doing a bunch of mutate stuff. So we're creating a new variable called gender, which is a factor in which we're recoding it basically from 0 to male and 1 to female. And then we're doing the same thing with treatment, recoding 0 to sugar and 1 to licorice. And then the last line here, we're just removing from the data set, any patients for whom we don't have the outcome of how much they were coughing the next day, because they can't feature in our graph and they just cause a bunch of warning signals in the graphs that we're creating. So I just thought let's get rid of that, because that will remove the warnings that we get. In order to graph along the way, yes. So actually, I'm not going to copy all the code into the chat, because I think that would get quite messy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop periodically and give you a bunch of code that you can have a go at. So let's just have a look at what the code is doing, and then I'll give you some code in a minute so you can try it at your end. But good question. So now that we've got the data like this, we can fix it, and we can see that we've now got a factor for gender, which is coded as male or female. We've got the treatment that's written nicely as licorice or sugar, and that will make it a lot easier for us to figure out where we're going from here. So box plot again, let's go. So we've got our box plot. This time it's working because we've got our variables sorted in the way that we need it to, but not super informative. We can't really see what's going on in the data. They all look pretty much the same, with maybe slightly more coughing for sugar in the female patients, but this isn't super helpful. So I think I'm going to do my normal trick, which I enjoy and which I encourage you to do, which is to go back to the raw data and see what the raw data looks like, and how it falls within our graph. So I am saying on the x-axis we're going to have gender, so we've got female and male. On the y-axis we've got how much coughing they did, which was rated as 0, 1, 2, 3. We'll come back to where it's a little bit messy in a minute. And then we're colouring the dots by the treatment that they received. So that was either being given some sugar or being given some licorice to gargle before the operation. So that's our graph. It's a little bit messy, not super easy to understand. So we're going to tidy it up a little bit. We're going to tighten the amount by which the dots are jittered. So rather than allowing them to be jittered, for the full range of minus 0.5 to 0.5, we're going to say only jitter them by 0.1, either side of the point that they correspond to. The point of using jitter is that otherwise they would all be on top of each other, so we wouldn't see what's going on. This allows us to spread them out a little bit, but we don't want to spread them out too much, because otherwise we're just going to get a little bit confused as to what they actually correspond to. So we've got our dots jittered by 0.1 in terms of height and in terms of width, which is helping us. And then we can add in, if we want to, the mean for each treatment within each gender. So this is where people might get confused about the mean and whether the median would have been a better thing to use, possibly, but the median was just sitting at the bottom and wasn't giving us anything useful. So this is partly let's see what's going on in the data, and partly let's see what we can do with ggplot moment. So the good thing that I've actually never used this, but you can use stat summary to take the mean of the dots that are on the y-axis and create a line there. Has anybody used that before in their graphs and enjoyed it? Any thumbs up? No. Yes, a thumbs up from Ray. Excellent. So, it's actually quite handy. So it does some computation for you on the output of the graph. So you can't feed it things like an extra label to put in based on the data. But what you can do is say, see where the dots land within the graph and give me the mean of that according to the treatment that we have and the gender that it corresponds to. So we've got two little lines added into our graph, which is, useful, but we could maybe make it a little bit more helpful. And to do that, we can add in some text. So we're going to add in what the text is that is the mean. So we're saying label equals janitor round half up after stat y2. So what that means is we're rounding to two decimal places. The mean, which is the after stat because we're taking it from here. And the reason why I'm using janitor to do the rounding is because if you just use round in R, you get some unexpected behaviors when you get to kind of 0.50 or 1.50. You have a go at that in your own time. Janitor just gives us rounding that we're kind of used to in terms of other maths that we're doing rather than the computer science approach to rounding numbers. So here we've got the data. I've done a bit of a nudge, so I've moved the text up a little bit from the bar, so that we can see the. Otherwise, it would just be overlapping with the bar, and we wouldn't be able to see the text. So position nudge is another really useful thing for us to be using when we're creating annotations in our graphs. But it's kind of hard to read because those text colors are not super accessible on the background. So I thought I would just color it black. So when I colored it black, it did something very interesting. It just gave me the mean across both treatments and put the label where it was. Can anybody figure out what's going on and why this has happened? Any answers in the chat? Any guesses in the chat? Yeah, excellent. So I've overridden the color argument. And color was what was determining the grouping of the data. So yeah, we needed the combination of Martina and Sarah and John to get that sorted. So we've got the color argument initially was also acting as the grouping argument. So that was separating the dots into the different groups and then creating the two different lines. If we override the color, we're getting rid of that separation. So it's just taking them all together and calculating the mean based on that. The easy solution to that is just to simply add back in a group argument, which then is going to allow us to separate out those two lines as we go. So we've now got the annotations sorted. We've got two lines sorted there. We've used stat summary, which has avoided having to do any extra computations before we create our graph. So a nice little shortcut there for creating a bit of a reference point inside our data. We're going to fix the text size. And so the text size here, we can determine it all using theme minimals base size. So if you've not used theme minimals base size before, really, really handy. You just set one value and then it's got some handy little things inside theme minimal that means that the scale kind of the text scales sensibly to the numbers that you're putting in there. So we've got theme minimal with a base text size of 20, which is really good. And we can also change the text size of the labels. So the fun thing going on here is that the size that's inside a geometry is not determined with the same units as the size that's within the theming. So here within the theme, we're going in points. Here we're going in something else that I can't actually remember, but there is a simple solution for that, which is to use size.unit and specify that it's in points, and then everything ends up being the same size. And I have to thank Nicola Rennie for pointing this out on LinkedIn just the other day. So Nicola, thank you very much. That was very, very helpful. It's another really handy feature of ggplot that I hadn't come across before. So I'm really glad to know about this now and thought I should probably share it with you as well as part of this workshop. So we've got the size set in there, which is really, really handy. And then we should probably add a title in. So we've got severity of the cough on the morning after operation. There are better titles, and we'll come to that later, but I just wanted to put something in there so that we should get that sorted. So we've got a title, and then we can demonstrate where we go. Johnny, you're asking, is there any relevance to the positioning of the points on the graph? Yes, good question. So the points only represent 0, 1, 2, and 3. I've kind of moved them around because otherwise they would all be overlapping, so you would just really see one point. Positioning them with a bit of a jitter means that you're able to see how many points are clustering at that specific point, because otherwise you would only see one and you wouldn't really see anything useful at all. So yeah, good question. Thanks, Johnny. So we've got the text size sorted. We've got the graphs. You know, it's functional. It does a job. It's not amazing, and we're going to build on that, so that we can keep styling it. We can add some colors. We can add some functionality. We're going to make it interactive. We're going to link it with another one and make two graphs respond to each other. It's going to be fun. But first, we need to get the basics sorted. So I am going to pop into the chat a link to a first code gist, which should allow you to do the stuff that we've talked about so far. So you need to install the medical data package, and then there's stuff in here about tidying up the data. Let me see if I can. Firefox can't open it because I'm just showing it within the window. That's fine. So if you open it at your end, you will see there's a section that tidies up the data, and then we've got our basic graph and the stat summary within that. And you can copy paste all of that into your own RStudio or Positron and give it a go and see if that works for you. Part of the code along workshops is that you can reproduce the stuff that I'm doing. But if you've already got a data set that you're working on and you want to just grab little bits of code and apply them to your own graphs, please do that. And if you get stuck, give us a shout and we'll see what we can do to get you unstuck. But have people managed to open up the link? And have we got some graphs going? Let's see. Yep. Good, good, good. Got a couple of thumbs up from folks. Excellent. So that should should just run. And that means that those of you who are new to ggplot, hopefully you've got something that's rendering and you can see a plot in your viewer window. Though those of you who have been using ggplot for ages, this is maybe just a way of figuring out if there's a couple of new tricks that you can pinch and apply to your own graphs. But this is very much our starting point, and we are going to make it look so much better. So let's try to style it. Oh yes, you also need to load library ggplot. Thank you very much, Ray, for pointing that out. Otherwise, the ggplot stuff will not work. So yeah, library ggplot, and then you can work on the rest of it. So in terms of styling it, I often encourage people to start with a photo or an image or a painting or something that is loosely tied to the concept that you're depicting. Can get tricky when it comes to abstract terms. It can get tricky when it comes to medical terminology. But just try and think a little bit abstractly about the stuff that you're depicting and see if you can find some kind of image that you think could relate to that. For my graph, I wanted a colour for licorice. I wanted a color for sugar, and I also wanted a color that we can use as a highlight color later on in the workshop. So I went to licorice all sorts because that's where I go in my head when I think about licorice. My grandmother was very fond of them and used to give them to us as kids, and I was one of the kids that used to just nibble the sugary bit round the around the edge of the licorice rather than eating the licorice itself because I didn't. I'm in camp less licorice. I think. Although maybe that's something that's an acquired taste. I should revisit the licorice all sorts. But anyway, we've got them here. Um, and what I've done is I've put the photo into Image Color Picker to pick out some colors. So let me just copy the image and then open this up and show you how this works. So if you say use your own image and then you paste the image in, what the tool allows you to do is pick out different colors from the image that you might want to use. So there's kind of a bluey gray here. There was another blue here. I think I kind of mix the two together to get the licorice color. Then I've got a nice little highlight color here, nice and bold, and then we've got a pink color going on here. So there's lots of different color drop tools that you can use. You've maybe have one natively on your system. This is just a website that is very easy to use, and the fact that you can just copy your own image in using copy paste, I find to be really helpful. Um, so you go somewhere like this, you pick out some colors and think, right, okay, I need a highlight color. I'm going to use that one. It gives you the hex code. You make a note of that, copy it down somewhere. Sugar color, that'll do. Copy it down somewhere else, and then you create a licorice color by combining some of the colors or taking maybe it was dark blue from over here somewhere, and that gives you the colors that you need for the graph. ggplot works really well if we give it hex codes. So it's just a way of encoding color. And if you've been used to using Excel or PowerPoint, you might be more used to seeing the RGB values. It's just a different system, but it's worth getting to know what hex colors are and not being scared of using them in our graphs because it does make a big difference. So I've noted the hex colors that I've got here. I'm just going to copy the link to Image Color Picker into the chat, and you can have a go at that at some point if you would like to. So we've got colors for licorice, sugar, and highlight. And then I also wanted us to get colors for dark text and light text and also a background color, just so that we can get everything to look nicely cohesive. So let's see what I did for that. Oh yeah, I was going to do the text colors afterwards. So actually, let's just spend a little bit of time trying to find some colors. So if you can take a few minutes, I would encourage you to go to Google Images and look for an image that is related to something that you're interested in your data. If you're totally stuck for ideas, feel free to pop something in the chat, and I'll see if I can suggest something to look for. Keep it classy. And go and look for imagecolorpicker.com and put your image into that and pick out a few colors that you think might be useful for you. And what I'm going to do in a bit is share with you the code that applies the colors to the graph. So what it would be really fun for you to do is figure out what colors you want to use that are related to your own data, and then you can swap your colors in for the ones that I've used. So if everybody can have a quick look for an image and pop that into Image Color Picker and see if you can find some colors that you think might be good for your own graphs, and then we'll pick that up again in a few minutes. Everybody clear on what you're doing? Yeah, any thumbs up? Yeah, good stuff. Okay, while you do that, I'm just going to go get myself a glass of water. But don't disappear because we're only doing this for a few minutes. Okay, see you in a couple of minutes. Okay. Is anyone totally stuck on colors and can I help you get unstuck in any way? Anyone feeling brave enough? No, we're all good.
Could you show again that we're supposed to create?
So it was just getting you to have a look at Google Images and see if you could come up with a color that was going to be helpful for you. So we used this image earlier. Oops,
Yeah,
so
but we're
let me just
applying
bring
it
that
to
again.
something, aren't we? And I missed that bit.
Yes, yes, yes. So sorry. So I'm applying it to the licorice gargle study. But my question to you is, can you think of colors that are relevant for the data that you're looking at? So you might be looking at I don't know what you would be looking at. I did a group recently, worked with a group recently who were looking at differences between urban populations and rural populations. And so they looked for images of rural settings and urban settings to try and figure out any kind of common themes that there were between them. So you could do something like that. Beth has pointed out a package to do colours for a specific journal, which can be good. But I think I always try and get people to think a little bit semantically about the stuff that they're doing. So is there a colour that you would naturally associate with the topics that you're looking at? That was the question. Okay, so let's move on. Hopefully you've had a little bit of a chance to have a look at some colours. Again, if you're stuck, just pop something in the chat, and we'll see what we can do. Um, Okay, so we have a guest here who's been told they can use any color as long as it's in a list of five. Yes, I talk quite a lot about picking colors. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here, but if you go to the talks page on my website, there's quite a lot of stuff about picking colors that look on brand, even though they're not part of your brand guidelines. It's not about going against the guidance that you've been given. It's about how, figuring out how we can make our graphs more intuitive for our readers. But if you've got those five colours with you and you want to give them a go today, absolutely do that. That's totally fine. So we've got the colours that we wanted for the different concepts, and then I want to come up with a dark colour, a light text colour, and a background colour, that's all going to work nicely for this. So to do that, I use the Monochroma app. Um, Red blood cells for red color. Yep, that sounds good. Andy, that's a really nice photo. And the colors that are coming from that look really, really good as well. So great. If you have kind of a main theme, so here we're talking about licorice. So I'm going to take my licorice color and then I'm going to go darker from that to create a bunch of possible colors for text. And I think in doing so, I quite like this one here. So this third one along, it's not completely black, and actually even the one at the very end isn't black. It's a black that's derived from the colour that we're going to be using for licorice, so that will kind of help tie everything together in the graphs that we're creating. If you, those of you who are thinking about accessibility in your graphs, which I'm hoping is most of you, if not all of you, the recommendation is to not use pure black text on a pure white background, just because the contrast between those two can be quite overwhelming for folks. And so if you can come up with a black that, you know, it looks black, but it's not actually black, it ties in with the rest of with the rest of your colours, then that works really well. So yes, Beth has pointed out there's the monochroma package, which I wrote a while ago, and then I turned it into an app that you can have a play around with as well. So I'm going to pick up this third color along for my dark text color, and then what I tend to do is use that dark text color and then go lighter from there, have a play around with however many gradients I want to use, and then pick a color that's a lighter version of that dark text color for the light text color. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we've got our hero color, we go darker from that, and then we go lighter from that darker color to come up with a lighter text color. And that gives us a few variants to play with. I'll just pop the link from that into the chat as well if you prefer using the Shiny app over the package. There's advantages to some of them. One of the advantages actually is that you can play around with a slider. So if I grab the sugar color from here and go back, to monochroma, if I put the sugar color in there and then blend to white, then I can play around with much more granularity than I could do with the original package. And so I used this to come up with a background color that we could use from our graphs. Um, Having a background color for your graphs helps with lots of things. It helps with that contrast of pure black on pure white that we talked about earlier, but it also helps with making sure that your graphs inside a document look tidy. So it means you have to line your graph up with the side of the text rather than having to worry about where the text inside the graph lines up with the text outside the graph and all that kind of stuff, which gets pretty messy pretty quickly. So if you've got a hero color, use it to come up with your text. Maybe use a different one of your hero colors to come up with the background color that you want to use, and just make a note of what those colors are. And then we can apply them to our graphs. So there's many different ways of doing that. But there is one way of doing it which I feel has kept me sane, and will hopefully keep you sane also in the process, which is to create a named vector of colors. So here we're just creating a vector, so you can see with the C at the start, and then the brackets, and we're saying licorice equals the hex code for the licorice color that we wanted, and sugar equals the hex code for the sugar color that we wanted. So we've got licorice, sugar, highlights, dark text, light text, and background. And then we can add these into our graph simply by using scale color manuals, values equals licorice gargle colors, which is the vector that we've created up here. So the beauty of doing this is that it makes sure that your data, the colors are definitely tied to the labels that are inside the data. If you just assign your colors using the hex codes, then you can end up with things going a bit funny. If you have a colleague who decides to rearrange your variable into a factor in a different order while you're away on holiday and you come back, you might find that your colors have got all jumbled and suddenly the licorice is the sugar color and the sugar is the licorice color, and that's not what you wanted. So having a named vector has kept me sane, and I think it will probably keep you sane as well in the process. So we pop it up here, and then we just feed it into Scale Color Manual down here, and you can see that it's applied our colors quite nicely within the graph there. So the thing is, when we look at it like this, it looks like there's loads more sugar patients than licorice patients, but actually it was pretty even between the two, and that's because the licorice patients are getting plotted first, and then the sugar patients are getting plotted on top of that. There's a bunch of ways around that. Someone actually wrote a package that shuffles things around, but you can just shuffle the data. So if you shuffle your data by kind of resampling it before you pop it into the graph, then it will put your it will mean that the licorice and the sugar patients kind of get mingled in the data, and then they get mingled as the graphs on the dot, as the dots on the graphs. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, yes, which was new to me as well. So the other way to do it is to use position jitter dodge. So sometimes if you've got position, you've got geom jitter, and you want to dodge it as well, and you can't do that. Or you just got a dodge and you want to jitter, and it gets complicated. So there is actually a position jitter dodge within ggplot natively, which is really, really handy. So what this allows you to do is control the jitter height of the dots, control the jitter width, and also dodge them. So what do we mean by dodging? We mean that we are putting the two conditions side by side rather than them having them overlapping. So it's the same thing as when you're creating, a bar graph. You can stack your bars or you can dodge your bars so that they're side by side. We can do the same thing here with our dots. Rather than having them on top of each other, we can dodge them side by side. So we've got the licorice dots to one side and the sugar dots to the other side, and the same for the male patients over here. So position jitter dodge is one to remember. Now, before I let you loose on the next set of code, I thought it would be worth having a look at accessibility within our colors. So we want to make sure that they work really well, and that anybody with different color perception can see the difference between them. The tool that I really like using for this is vis4.net/ palettes, and I believe that link should keep the colors that I fed into it. No, it didn't. That's okay. So if it did for you, well done. It doesn't seem to have done it here, it's just reset them. But I just wanted to show you how this tool works so that you can have a go at using it. Those of you who've got brand colors, it's worth having a check that your brand colors do work well from a colorblind perception point of view, because they haven't always been designed with that in mind, particularly when it comes to, small surface areas within data visualizations. So have a look at it and see what you do. The first thing I do is untick these boxes so that we're staying true to the colors that we've got up here. And then it gives us handy little warnings that that the palette is not colorblind safe. And you can kind of simulate what it looks like, and where the problem arises. I think these two here, these three, really become quite difficult to see the difference between. And actually, I find them quite difficult even without any colorblind issues. You can change the number of dots. So it might be that your colors work quite well when there's only three of them, but if you start to increase them, for example, if you've got some mapping to do or you want a gradient that goes between two colors, you might end up in a little bit of difficulty. The other thing that's really neat about this tool is that you can tweak the colors as you go. And come up with something. Ooh, that's horrible. So something that you like the look of, something that's going to work well for your context, and just kind of keep tweaking it, and see where you end up. And if you end up with something that doesn't work, you can keep tweaking it again, and again and again, and see see what you can do to come up with something that's going to work for your context. So have a go at putting your own colors in. See what's going to work, what's not going to work. The other thing I really like about this is that it allows you to check that the color that you perceive as most intense is also the one that's most intense when you simulate the different types of color blindness that can affect people's perception of them. So here, the dark green definitely looks more intense across the different colorblind simulations. So that would be a positive, I think, in developing a scale in which you wanted that to be the most intense color. So we've checked our colors against each other, and we know that they work, which is great. Um, but the trouble is they all don't necessarily work in terms of the contrast between the color and its background. So I don't know how many of you have read through the entirety of the Web Accessibility Guidelines. Um, it's probably quite a long read, but the trouble is that it's basically mathematically impossible to come up with a color palette in which the colors stand out against each other, so they're different enough from each other, and stand out against their background enough, so they have enough of a dark to light ratio, if you've got any more than a handful of colors. So if you're working on data visualization, it's likely that you'll need more than three or four colors, or more than two or three colors. And if that's the case, it's actually really difficult to come up with a color palette in which you've got the right contrast. So this tool works really well to kind of show us what's going on in the data. Not what's going on in the data, what's going on in terms of the perception of the colors. One thing that I only really realized fairly recently was that black text on dark red is actually very, very difficult to read for anyone who has any kind of colorblind perception issues, because the intensity of the red paired with the black means that the black kind of disappears into it. So this is quite a useful tool to check your color contrasts and to play around with them. If you're creating any kind of red, amber, green tables and you've got text within your table, you'll want to check this. The easiest trick really is to go for something more subtle, and go for a much paler red. Do you need the red in your table to be super dark red? Possibly, but probably not. And go from there. So just another really useful tool when we're checking that our colors are not only standing out enough from the background, but also standing out enough from each other. So we've highlighted here that the pink does not stand out enough from its background. It's too pale compared to the background color. But there is a handy little fix for that. And the fix for that in ggplot is to just change the shape of our dot. So the standard geom point is just a colored dot. If we change the shape to 21, what we end up with is a contour. So we've got the contour to the dot instead of the dot itself. Now that's not helpful here because we've already said that the pink is too pale. But what we can do is change it so that actually what we're coloring is the inside of the dot, and then we get a dark outline, a dark contour for our dot. So shape 21 is your friend if you have got a combination of colors that need some light colors, but you still want the dot to be distinguishable from the background. Everybody still with me? Yep. Good, good, good. Okay, so we've got shape 21. Now, the fun thing about the new ggplot release is that we can set some defaults within our theme that are going to apply exactly to this. So we've still got the scale fill manual. We have to use the fill now instead of the color because we've changed what the licorice and the sugar colors map to. They map to the inside of the dot, not to the whole dot itself. Um, and then we can use the new theme geom argument to set some defaults. So can we get a few waves or thumbs up from people who've used the theme argument, sorry, the geom argument of theme so far? Who's had a play around with it? Anyone? Andy has. Good, good, good. Ray has. Excellent. If you're on my second screen, you might be giving loads of thumbs up, so I'm not seeing you, so sorry about that. Yep, Kitan, excellent. Good, good, good. So people have played around with it a little bit, which is great. It's really, really handy. So what it allows you to do is standardize a few things across all of your graphs. So here I'm saying the ink. So that's going to be what determines the color of the contour of my dot. I'm going to set that to be the light text color that we decided on earlier. That just keeps things nice and on brand. You can decide what size of dot you want to use. And you can also set how thick that contour line is. Now, normally when you're setting that inside geom point, it's called stroke, but here it's called border width. So if you're trying to figure out why stroke isn't working, border width is the argument that you need. And you can also set the line width. So these lines now appear a little bit thinner than they did earlier. And this just means that if you've got this inside your theme argument, your theme component to your graph, any new graph that you create will bring these through. And it just gives you a lot of consistency across your graphs without you having to type the same thing all over again every time you're creating a new geom or creating a new graph. So we've got the geom element within there, we've got the ink, we've got the size, we've got the border width instead of the stroke, and we've got the line width. And you can see it's subtle, but we do have a little outline around each of our dots, which gives us a little bit more confidence that they are visible enough against the background, which they weren't earlier. So far so good? Okay, so we've got the element geom. That was a nice new thing to have a play around with. Um, and then we're going to do a few things with the theme. So we'll do more with the theme in a bit, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of a flavour for where we're going. We can change the theme to have a background colour. And I just feel like it already makes a difference. So here we don't have a background, here we do have a background, and it's just more calm to look at. Suddenly, you've gone from lots of text all over the place here, where am I supposed to look, to a little box that's nicely self-enclosed, that you can just process all at once, which is good. So we've got a background here which allows us to focus on the graph in and of itself. We've just changed the background color of it by changing the fill and the color of the background. If you don't change the color, you end up with a line around the outside of the graph, which isn't really the vibe that we're going for. And because we've got a background color, I've made the grid white instead of having the grid be a light gray color. I think that does the trick nicely. It's subtle, but it's there. You can play around with the contrast that you want between your grid lines and the background, but it's just a bit of an alternative to the normal themes that we see around. So Martina has a question about adding the theme to each graph. Yes, So we're gonna package up the theme later and make that a reusable component that we can apply wherever we want to. You either have to add the theme to each graph, or you can use set theme at the start of your document, and then that will apply the same theme across all of them. So yeah, so you can create your own custom theme, and then you can apply that. You can apply that within each graph, or you can apply it at the start of your document, and then it will carry it through to all of the graphs in the document. Did that answer your question, Martina? Yep, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we've added a background color. Yep, set theme. It's either set theme or theme set. They've changed around a couple of, which way the verb and the object go in these arguments recently. So have a look at the documentation, but there's definitely something along those lines that allows you to do that. So I thought at this point I would give you access to the next code gist. So this one, it shows you how we've added the colors into the graph. So it's kind of recapping what we've done. You might want to check for accessibility. So I popped the links for the accessible checks within here earlier. Check that they work, and then you can have a play around with changing the shapes. So I think shape 22 is a square. Try that if you want to. Um, Play around with the geom elements. So try and change the outline to red, change the width of the border, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes the best way to figure out what an argument does is to make something deliberately super ugly. So that should allow you to figure out where the red is appearing in your graph, and that should work for you. So have a go. Has everybody managed to open up the link? And if not, I will think again. Yeah, we've got a couple of thumbs up. Good, good, good. Okay, so have a go at that. I'm gonna mute myself and let you do that for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and do some more stuff before we take a break. All good? So Alina asked a good question about not being able to find element geom. That's only available in the newer releases of ggplot. So if you have an older version of ggplot, unfortunately you're not going to be able to use that. But what you can use is the same stuff inside geom point. So you can set the stroke, you can set the color of the contour, and do all that kind of stuff inside Jump Point instead of doing it inside the theme. Um, that might work for you. Okay, have you folks got the Geom stuff working? Oh, I'm being asked if I will go through how to save or export the image I create in R. Um, I wasn't planning to, but what you need to look up is ggSave. That's the way to do that. If you're creating ggplot, ggSave is the best way to export the images that we create. And that should all work. Um, I did actually write up a whole documentation page for a client recently about different ways of doing it and making sure that everything was, the text was the same size across all of them and all that kind of stuff. So I'll turn that into a blog post at some point, and I will let you know when that's out. Um, but yeah. Okay, so we've got a question about geom text and geom crossbar and can they interact? So those are creating two different things. So let me go back. We've got geom crossbar here, which creates the line. And then we've got geom text here, which creates the annotation that sits on top of it. So those are not interacting. Those are two different yeah, they're created by two different functions inside our ggplot. Um, yeah, does that answer your question? Not really. Maybe it does. I'll come back to that if we're still stuck. Should we move on and do some more fun stuff? So there's some other stuff that's come out fairly recently that is quite fun. Um, the in terms of this isn't from the brand new release of ggplot. This is a couple of releases ago, but I hadn't really played around with it yet. So I thought this workshop would be a good excuse to do that, to play around with the gradient fill that we can use. So we've got new ways of creating fills within bars in ggplot, which is quite fun. I've created for us here a blue to red fill just so that we can see what's going on. And so we tell it to start the blue at the bottom. So the first, I think my understanding is that X1 and X2 correspond to the first color, and then sorry, X and Y correspond to the colors, and then 1 and 2 correspond to the top and the bottom, or where the color reaches its peak. So here we've got 0, 0, 0, 1. So we've got a bar that goes from blue at the both corners at the bottom to red at the top. And we've got it group as false. And so that means that both of the bars reach the full red at the top of them. So that might be an aesthetic choice that you want to make. I don't know whether it's just because I've grown up with a gigging family and we've got some a lot of sound desks that we knew how to love and how to work. But to me, it makes more sense if the gradient is stable across all of them, and then it's almost like the color signals how far towards the top of the color we've got to. So if you set the group to true, sorry, which is the default, then it gives you a gradient that goes across all the bars, and so we can see that this shorter bar doesn't get to the full red color by the top of it. It kind of stops midpoint, which to me makes more sense in interpreting the data. But again, this might be a style that you want to go with. But I think if we're using the gradients for meaning, then this is a sensible way to do it. So leave it as group equals true, which is the default. And then we can see that we simply use it as the fill down here. So we create the gradient outside of the graph, and then we just pull it in to the fill argument that we're using here, which is good. I'm going to just pause here. So Martina's got a question about ggplot in chunks and figure widths and figure heights, the text being different sizes. So yeah, you want to have a look at the out width argument. So you've got the height and the width of the graph, but you've also got the kind of how it perceives its size and then shrinks it to the document. So you want to have a think about keeping things the same height if you can, or the same width. It's either height or width, I can't remember, but one of the two helps you keep the text size the same. And then if you vary the rest of it, that should keep your text to the same size. That was very jumbled, wasn't it? Yeah, but you said thank you, so I'll take that gracefully. Thank you very much. It's very generous of you. So yeah, it's about figuring out which one controls it. I'm pretty sure if they're all the same height, then they end up with the same text size, but it might be width instead. So if you've got, so let's go back to our bars. Here we've got a bar which goes from blue to kind of 2/3 of the way towards red, and here we've got a bar that goes from blue to red at the very top, which I think is really what we want. So I thought we could add those into our data just to kind of emphasize the severity of the cough. So there are things I don't like about this, so we'll come back to it. So if you're thinking that's horrible, that's okay. I'm probably with you. But just again to demonstrate how this works, so we can create our geom. And we've got I'm going background to red because I kind of wanted to start with the background color and then take it to a red so that it kind of just grows from nothing, which is quite nice. So we're going from our background color to a red, and then we're pulling it in here. And we're going from 0 to the maximum that we have within each group. And we've got our bars growing there. It kind of works and it's subtle, but it's also a little bit confusing. So I thought let's add some annotations to help with the clarity of that. So we've looked at the gradient fill, which was something that was a little bit new. let's do some annotations. Mostly because I wanted to show you how we use the capital I and the brackets. Have people played around with that so far, to position stuff within a graph rather than on the data? Any thumbs up? No, a no from Beth. Excellent. Good, good, good. Well, it'll be new at least to Beth and probably to a few more folks here as well. So here we've got our data, sorry, our graph as we had it, and we can add geom text. We're going to give it an empty data frame because otherwise it's just going to plot lots and lots and lots of labels on top of each other because it's going to plot one label for each row in our data, and we do not want that to happen. So we're going to give it an empty data frame, and then we're going to say x equals capital I 0.5. And what this does is it puts a label right in the middle of our graph on the x coordinates. So it doesn't really care what's going on in terms of whether our coordinates are numeric or discrete. So continuous or discrete, it doesn't really care whether it goes from 0 to 100 or from 1 to 5. It's just going to put the label right in the middle of the graph. So slightly dangerous because you need to have a think about what this means. I was working with a client recently who had a lot of ratings to do with risk factors, and we had just divided the graph into three, and then we thought, actually, that's not the way to do it because you might end up with stuff being labeled as super high risk at the top, but that's just because that was what was in the data set. So generally speaking, if you're working on kind of standards, then just comparing and normalizing to what's in the data isn't the best way to go. But this can be really, really useful if you just want to pop a label somewhere where you know it's the right place to put the label. This is really useful here because gender is either female or male, and what we want is to put a label that sits in the middle of our graph, and we don't want to tie it to either one of those two bars. So we've got the I 0.5, put the label in the middle. Y, I'm putting at 3 because that was the maximum that we had. And then I just put a bit of label there that says these people did a lot of coughing. It's a simple geom text, nothing fancy going on here, which is why we've got the kind of break that we're used to. And it just means you've got your label sticking up here, which is really handy. You can do something a bit more fancy, so you can feed it a very simple data frame. Here we've got y coordinates that go from 0 to 3, and we've got labels, no cough, mild, moderate, severe cough. And then we can just put our labels where we want them to be by feeding it the y coordinates that we've given it and feeding it the labels that we've given it here in the mini data frame that we've given it. So really, really useful if you want to sort that out. So yeah, if you want to do that by there's a question about doing this by percentage of the entire y-axis range. So that would do the same thing. So you could, instead of your y coordinates being 0, 1, 2, 3, I am assuming, although I haven't tested this, you can test it when I share the code. If you put the coordinates to be I0, I 0.25, I 0.5, I 0.75, for example, then that would put one at each of the um, yeah, at those points, those are probably not the right ones. You can do the maths to figure out which ones you need, but I think that that would also do the trick for you. Um, the reason why I haven't done it here is because I wanted to tie the labels to what's actually in the data. So let's say you were just doing a subset of your patients and they had only reported either no cough or a mild cough. You would be in danger of labeling the mild cough as a severe cough because it would be the one that's at the top of the range that you've got. So here what we're doing instead is we're tying it to the labels that were in the data. And the data help function told us that we've got no cough, mild, moderate, and severe cough. So we're just tying it to existing labels, which gets us away from the danger of the data skewing our interpretation of the labels. Does that make sense? Yeah, so if you do it to what's in the data, you would end up with potentially labeling mild as severe because mild would be the top of your range that's available in the data that you've got. Instead, we're tying it to exactly what the labels are in the data. So it's, in my mind, safer, but you can have a play around and see where you land with that. So I'm gonna move the legend to the bottom because it was kind of annoying me. And yes, excellent. So Kitan, you've pointed out that the Y axis label has changed, and this was going to be my next slide. So you've anticipated me getting there. Um, this has changed, and now again, this is something that's tied that didn't used to happen, but it happens in the newer ggplot releases. This is because geom_bar, which is what we're feeding it here, is the first layer of data that we're mapping. Excuse me. And so the y-axis the y-axis label is coming from this here. And so it's taken what we fed in as the first y, and then it's keeping that for the rest of the graph, even though we had said y equals the cough here at the start. So the culprit here is that the first layer that we're feeding it in has got a we're feeding it different data. So we're basically saying the cough plus 0.2 from this mini data set that we've put in. Um, and yeah, that's messy. So we're going to get rid of that because we don't really need it. Now that we've got our annotations in, we don't really even need the 0, 1, 2, 3 because those were just arbitrary numbers that were associated with a label. So now that we've got that in, I think we can get rid of the y-axis completely. Feel free to push back if you don't think that's the right thing to do, but I think that does help us with our graph. So I've got rid of the title and of the text by just using element blank, which again, super, super useful function that you can use within the theme to just get rid of anything that you don't need. I would encourage you to be bold with it. See what you can get away with getting rid of. And if you regret it, you can always put it back in. That is totally fine. But using element blank is a nice way of decluttering what we've got in our graph. So we've done that. What else can we do? I've decluttered a whole bunch of other stuff. So I've got rid of the axis title because we've got male and female. We didn't really need to specify an extra label for that. I have got rid of, slightly controversially, the major grid axis, um, partly so that the dots fall neatly within almost like swim lanes. So we've got the minor axis that go from the zero point 0.5, minus 0.5 to zero point 0.5, either side of our labels. And so we can see no cough, mild cough, moderate cough, severe cough up here. I think to me this looks good and it does the job. And it makes things a little bit clearer, a little bit of declutter going on. I've also added back in the axis line. I kind of felt like it was missing here. There was just a lot. It looked like female and male were almost extra labels, and I wanted the axis line back in. So you can do that simply with axis line, element line. And then I've styled it so that it uses the same color as our light text and so that we've got the right width for it as well to keep it nice and subtle. You don't want, a huge chunky line down there. You just want something that anchors the eye a little bit, but nothing too severe. So there we go. We've decluttered that. What else can we get rid of? I'm still finding things a little bit confusing. So I thought I would maybe make male and female bolder, make that stand out more because I'm starting to think that the bars are maybe to do with licorice and the sugar, but they're not. They're to do with female and male, and actually they're not super important because it's only really 2 people and 4 people that are determining the top of it. It was really to give us just an impression of how severe the cough is as we go up the scale. So it's a bit confusing. I thought maybe we could put female and male at the top. You can do that with scale discrete position equals top. Worth a play around with that actually. Or sometimes it's putting the y-axis on the other side. Sometimes just moving the text to somewhere where you're naturally looking makes your graph a lot easier to process. So you can do that by changing the position to position equals top. But that still wasn't really working for me. So instead what I did was this. So I reinstated a rectangle instead of using the bars because what we were trying to capture with the rectangle is the severity of the cough, not really where the data lies. And I find this less confusing to look at. Now, the trouble with doing this is that annotate would be the normal way to do this. So normally you would say plus annotate, open a bracket, and then you would say you want to use geom equals rect. So you want to put a rectangle in, and then annotate does it without needing you to put in any data behind it, which is really helpful. And you only create one rectangle. Whereas if you do geom rect, what it will do naturally is create one new rectangle for each row of your data. You do not want to do that because that's creating lots of rectangles. And if you're doing anything with a bit of transparency and subtlety, you end up having to push your transparency right to, 0.001 if you've got hundreds of rows for it to do anything remotely sensible. So the solution to that is to use to just kind of sample one element of your data. You can either use dplat sample n equals one, or I could have just used, head one or tail one to do exactly the same trick. Then we're using our little eye trick that we used earlier because I didn't really want the rectangle to go from minus infinity to plus infinity in my graph. I wanted it to kind of be within the graph itself. And so we're starting it at zero point 0.1, we're going to 0.9. We're setting the minimum of it at 0 and the maximum at 3.5 so that that kind of gives it all the width, the same width for severe cough as we have for all the other ones. And we're using our gradient fill and using alpha equals 0.1 to keep it nice and subtle like we did earlier. So we've applied the same concept, but instead of having these bars, which I felt were kind of getting in the way of the story, we've got a rectangle which does the same thing and conveys the emphasis that we were trying to convey in the first place. So I'm going to say now is the time to have another go at some of the code that we've been looking at. I copy the link into the chat again. And in the code here, you can see the gradient fill, you can see the use of I, and you can see how we've added the axis line back in, a bit of use of element blank. So have a go at that, have a look around, pinch from it whatever you would like to pinch from it, and let me know if you've got stuck on anything. Has anyone opened the code? Okay, got that working. Yep, good, good, good. So since the whole purpose of these is for you to just yeah, reuse as much as you want, do feel free to reuse as much as you want of this code. I will add the code for the full graph, and we're going to get it playing with a second graph as well after the break. So I'll add all of that onto the website, and you can have a play around and see what you would like to reuse for your own purposes. But yeah, part of the point really today was to explore a few new tricks with ggplot, and how they can really help us emphasize the stories in the graphs that we're creating. Anyone stuck on anything in the code that I've just shared? Looks like we're okay. I'll just scroll through the different pages of people. Yes, okay, so well, John, thank you. Yes, I think the geom show scale is actually quite a fun extra trick that you can use, and I've been using it for a few graphs recently. And in terms of fill alpha, unable to check the capabilities of the PNG device. Can I check, is this Positron or is it RStudio that you're using? Because sometimes we get issues.
It looks like they're using our,
RStudio.
yeah.
Yeah, RStudio. So the honest answer here is I don't really know why you're getting that warning. But if it's just a warning and it's not stopping your graph from going, I would, crack on. And the actually one thing that's really helpful is just feeding your error messages into Claude and seeing what Claude comes up with. Claude it sometimes comes up with some interesting things. It tried to get me to relocate the entirety of my R library because I was struggling to install a new package. So do take the answers with a slight pinch of salt, but it can be really, really helpful for figuring out what's going on with error messages and guiding you through that. Um, oh, and the boxes aren't shown. Okay, then I'm afraid I don't really know. Um, yeah, sorry. It's kind of hard to troubleshoot at a distance for that kind of stuff. But try the alpha and see what comes up. Ray, you're asking if there's an easy way to change the bottom color off from the rectangle. So, do you want to talk me through what you mean by that? Do you mean kind of starting it lower or?
Yeah, exactly. So I lose the fact that um where the bottom of uh, the bottom of the rectangle is. So just
Yeah.
thinking it blends so completely into the background, I'm losing the gestalt of the square.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fine. So, you could add a border around it if you wanted to. I actually partly did it as a fudge because it's starting at 0, but you would want it to start at minus zero point 0.5 if you wanted it to kind of go the other side of these dots. Does that make sense? So it's starting at 0, which is partly why I chose to keep it the same color because I quite liked the effect that it has. But if you're losing the gestalt of it, put a color around your rectangle, and that should do the job. So here you've just got the fill that's specified. If you specify a color, that could work. The other option that you could try is where we defined the gradient. Where was that? Going back a few slides now. Ba -ba -bam. It was before that, wasn't it? So where we defined the gradient, you could change, here we've got blue to red, so you could change what your starting color is and make that, yellow or something. That will show you exactly where the rectangle is starting, which will then mean that you can adapt what coordinate you want to start it at. So yeah, a couple of options there for you. Does that do the
Right
job?
on. Yeah, right on. So in the version I'm using, the colors are equal to licorice gargle square bracket background. I was wondering if
Mhm.
there's just a way to, you know, plus a little bit of dark. If there's a
Yeah.
way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So to do that, you could use monochroma and blend a
Brilliant.
bit of the background color with some black if you wanted to do that. Or blend it with some dark red or whichever color you want to take it from.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Where were we? Let's go back to where we were on the slides. Any other questions while I find my place? I flashed the next slide at you so you know what's coming. Any other questions? Yes. So Andreas, you've pointed out that the no cough box field is not tall enough. You're right. That's because um, I think that's because yeah, it only goes to minus 0.25 or something. If you wanted to stretch the box, you could get the box rather than the box starting at 0. If you made the box start at minus zero point 0.5, then I think that would give you a stretched no cough box. It would shift the data up a little bit, and I think that would solve your issue. Give that a go and see. And the other thing we might need to look into is the expansion on the scale. So if we start the rectangle, this is gonna be ugly. I'm gonna put some code in the chat. It's gonna reformat it in horrible ways. So let's start our rectangle here. So I've just changed the y min argument to be minus zero point 0.5. But then what we'll probably want to do is look at scale y continuous and change how much it expands. So coding totally blind in a chat, but I think you want to do something like this. It's probably a bracket missing or one too many. You can control how much space is left either side of your dots on your y-axis in the same way that you can control how much space is left either side of your dots on the x-axis. The expansion function does that for us. And you can either take a multiple of the data that's in there, or you can just add instead. So you could say add 0 or do a multiple of 0. The multiple is quite helpful if you're working with data with variable ranges. But I think something like that would probably do the job to fix that issue. Okay, any other questions? I shall take that as a no and suggest that it's time for a break. So we've been going for an hour and a half. Let's grab a coffee or a decaf option or some time outdoors, depending on what time of the day it is where you are, and reconvene in 15 minutes. We're going to be optimizing the text. We're going to be making it interactive. We're going to be doing all of this again with a new graph, and we're going to be tying two graphs together to make stuff happen in one graph when we hover over the next one. So I will see you guys in 15 minutes to continue what we're working on just now. But until then, have a good break. See you in a bit. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, the 15 minutes gave you enough time to have a quick break, grab some coffee, grab a sandwich, whatever it is that you need to keep you going. Thank you for coming back. That's always a positive when people come back. So well done. I thought maybe let me just share the slides again. That's the right thing to do, isn't it? And then I have a question for you. So we're back from our break. I would just like to know in the chat, what is your favorite aha moment so far? So maybe it was something that was new, or maybe it's something that you can see, you can already see a use for in your own graphs. Okay, so the I for placing things seems to be winning. Jitter dodge is also a goodie. Very good. Um, yeah, great. So those are the things that I'm excited about as well, which is good. Um, there's a couple of familiar faces as well, so I'm always pleased when somebody who's come to a lot of these talks leaves with something new and useful. So that's really good to hear as well. Yeah, and the tools for color schemes as well. Good, good, good. Yeah, vectors for colors, always the way to go. It will save your sanity when it comes to creating these kind of graphs, which is good. Okay, great, Johnny. I'm really glad you're enjoying this. So yeah, it's always, I think ggplot can be a bit daunting when we're just starting to get a hang of it. But actually, what I'm really enjoying with it is the flexibility that it gives us. So once we understand how the different components work together, it's absolutely brilliant. And you can also, I feel like with AI now, it's easier and easier to push the implementation of your ideas. So you can say, right, I want to make a waffle chart, but I want it to be a diverging waffle chart instead of the way that they normally are. Give me the coordinates that I need to do X, Y, and Z. There's a whole bunch of things that you can, because it's all done from the code and it's all, derived from some kind of logic. You can tweak the logic to make it do much more easily now, much quicker than we used to be able to do. So part of the joy really of these workshops is allowing people to see what can be done, and to see how far you can push it, and while staying within the realms of normal graphs still, rather than going all the way to the data art side of things, which is also really fun to play around with actually. But yeah, if it can open up some ideas for you and give you stuff to Google, stuff to explore with whichever AI tool you like using, then yeah, great. I'm really pleased. So that was good. We've done a bunch of stuff. We've optimized our graph, but there are more ways in which we can make it better. One thing that I really want us to do is optimize the text. So we're going to think about what the text should be. We're going to look at implementation of how we make it better. There's a couple of oh no's to look out for, and then maybe some oohs for some ideas of things that you might want to do in your own graphs as well. So can everybody see my slides? We're all back on track with the screen share. Good, good. Okay, so the first thing that we should probably ask ourselves with our graph is our title. So do we want a descriptive title or do we want a declarative title? So the descriptive title is along the lines of what we've already got. So we're saying severity of cough on the morning after operation. That's very much basically just putting a label on what the data is trying to show us. But it's not particularly memorable. It's not really giving us much of a story. It's a very much kind of here's the data, take a look for yourself kind of title. Now, that might be the kind of title that you need for your context, but if you're creating a graph that needs to be, say, a standalone graph, or maybe it's one that's in a paper to emphasize part of the story that you're telling, then you might want to think about a declarative title. So that would be one which has more of a story to it. So I've just actually, for the sake of not having all the code everywhere all the time, I've saved our little ggplot as an object here. So I'm saying, ggplot and all the rest of the code that we've done. And I'm just going to save that as an object called the licorice cough plot. And then I'm just calling that object here, and that generates the graph. So you can save your ggplot objects, you save your ggplots as objects, which means that then you can keep building on them without having to copy paste the code everywhere. So we've got the plot here, and I'm going to override the title. So I'm going to say patients who gargled licorice reported a slightly less severe cough than those who gargled sugar. That's, it's a story. You can take me up on the stats of it at some point if you want to, but that's the story that we're going to stick with for now. And then I've added a subtitle to say the effect was similar across female and male patients on the morning after surgery. So just a little bit more context. So the first thing that you're noticing is that we can't read all the title because it's gone off the edge of the graph. So in the good old days, what you had to do was keep putting line breaks in your title to try to figure out how to get it to fit within your graph. And then you would resize your title because you needed it to be slightly bigger, and then your line breaks would be in the wrong place, and it was just all a bit of a mess. So there are better ways of doing that, which I'm very happy to be able to share with you. The first thing we're going to do first, though, is change the font of our graph. So we are going to make it a font that is more accessible but has a bit of personality to it. There's a bunch of resources out there on how to choose a font. I've also written a blog post on how to get fonts to work well within R, because it's not the easiest thing in the world, but I think I've hit my head against most of the walls that you're going to find in doing that. So hopefully the blog post will help demystify a good bunch of that as well. So we've got we've got the text here, and then we're going to just change the Atkinson hyperlegible font in. So Atkinson hyperlegible does what it says on the tin. It is, I think, either created or endorsed by the Braille Foundation. So really, really designed to be easy to read for people who struggle to read text in small font sizes. And actually, because most of what we do for data viz, we've got to fit a lot of text into not a huge amount of space, then it's quite a good font for us to be using. So I'm not going to go into details on how to pick different fonts, but Atkinson Hyperlegible does the job for us, and I'm just going to add it in so we can see the impact that it has. This is our default ggplot font, and here we've got it with a bit more personality and a bit easier to read. The other thing that's really neat in the new geom argument within theme is that we can apply a font family across our geoms. So this is new. So you used to have to specify the font family within each of the different text geoms that you're adding into your graph. Now you can do that all in one go inside the theme argument. So this is absolutely brilliant. This means that I have to rewrite a bunch of my tutorials, but that's a good thing. Because we're saving ourselves quite a lot of code maintenance by just having the font family in one place. Now, with all of these geom element things, you can override them. So if I wanted a text box that was a different font, I could just specify that within the text box code itself. But if I don't specify a font within my geom text, then this will just apply Atkinson Hyperlegible to it. And so I know I've got all my text boxes styled in the way that I need them to without copy pasting family equals Atkinson Hyperlegible about 5 or 6 times throughout the course of my code. So this is a great addition. Very, very happy about this. And it will save us all a lot of time. We've optimized the font. We need to optimize the text hierarchy. So I think I've used this image in most of the presentations that I have given. So if you've seen a presentation by me, you have probably seen this one before. Um, it's one of these things, text hierarchy is easier to demonstrate than it is to describe. But I don't think I've yet found anyone who disagrees with what it says on this image. So the way that text is formatted guides us as to what we should read first. So we're reading this, and then we read the slightly light blue bit under here. Then we probably do skip to this paragraph. Then we go to the body text if we want to find out more. And then we remember that there was something up here that we skipped over. So when we're creating our graphs, it's up to us to try and have this effect on our readers to guide them as to what the most important bit of text is and what comes next. So here is our starting point. It's fine, but it's a bit of a wall of text and it goes off the side. We'll fix that in a minute. What we want to do is make the title bigger than the rest of it because then it kind of anchors us on the title being more important and the first thing to read. It's just a little bit less confusing if we've got a very clear visual anchor for something that we're looking at. There's lots of different ways of changing the title size, but I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend using this rel function. So what this does is it allows you to make the title a multiple of the base text size that we've got. So we had earlier decided that within theme minimal we would set our base text size to 20 and we're setting the title to 1.5 times 20. This means that if at some point in the future we decide that actually our graph should have a smaller base text size, then the title will scale accordingly. Or if it needs to be bigger, then the title will scale accordingly. This is really useful if you're jumping between something that's in a slide deck, like this is, and something that's in a quarto document, or something that is in a PDF that you're running. So if you have a way of making sure that your text sizes within your graphs are relative to each other rather than hard-coded everywhere, it will save you a lot of time if you have to adapt the main base text size of your graph. So we can use rel, and it's generally a good idea anyway to have your fonts be multiples of each other in terms of their sizes. 1.5 I think works well for the graph that we've got. 1.6 is a fairly standard one to settle on as well. And it just gives us a nice bit of visual differentiation between them. I'm also going to make the title bold, which just emphasizes that text hierarchy a little bit more, simply by using face equals bold. But we're still running off the edge of the graph, which is problematic. So there are two solutions to that, and I'm going to show you both of them in one go. So you can either use marquee element marquee, which is the new kid on the block in terms, well, new, probably been a couple of years now, but it's the newer way of doing things. So you've got marquee, element marquee, and same thing, you can set the size. The important thing is to set the width equals 1, and then that means that it basically puts it inside a box that wraps it to the graph. So I haven't added any line breaks anywhere here. All it's doing is seeing what size is available and it's wrapping the text within that, which is really, really handy. It's a bit more fiddly when it comes to adding things like bold text, but again, either the documentation or AI can be quite helpful in helping you figure out how to do all these things that you know you want to do. Your other option is to use ggtext element text box simple, which does exactly the same thing. So it will wrap everything within the space that is available to us within the graph and do it in the same way that marquee did. So there's a couple of subtleties between the two, which we'll explore as we continue on this section. Yeah, so someone in the chat is asking about links to the slides. I will post all of this at the talks page of my website, so cararthompson.com/talks. They're not there yet, but they will be very, very soon. So you'll be able to revisit all of this. So we've got our graph like this, and we want to make sure that we've got text hierarchy sorted, but there's still a few things that I think we can optimize. We can change the colors, so we can make our title that dark text color that we decided on earlier, and we can make the subtitle the light text color that we had earlier. And we can also feed all of those colors into the text argument if we want to. And so we've got just a bit more text hierarchy here, which I think is really helpful. Now we can also do the legend slightly differently. I tend to use I've used the markdown version of this with ggtext element text box simple quite a lot in the past. I thought I would give marquee a go because marquee allows us to color the background of our text in a way that ggtext doesn't support. So it's quite fun to play around with this. There's a little bit of setup. So we need to define our highlight style. And we're taking the highlight style from the classic style that's within marquee. And the important thing here is that we're giving it a name, sugar, and then we're giving it basically what ends up being CSS values. So we've got the background, which is the sugar color that we've defined within our color vector. We're giving it a color of text, which is the dark text, and we're giving it a bit of padding, which means that the background will stretch just a little bit beyond the word. It just makes it look a little bit nicer. Importantly, the US spelling of color is required when it comes to passing things on to CSS. So if you're used to spelling it with a U in the middle, you'll have to not use the U when you're doing this. So we've got one style with a name for sugar, and then one style with a name here for licorice, which means that then we can do this. So we can change our title to incorporate a background color, change the text color, background color, keep the same text color for this one. And we're just doing it by using these curly brackets and calling in the style that we named in the previous slide. So it's really handy. It looks quite nice and it allows us to make the licorice really stand out as the important thing in the story, and it ties it into the color. So I always talk about placing information where people are naturally looking in the graph. People will always be reading the title because we're just wired to read stuff. So if you can help them understand how to interpret the graph by putting some colors in your title, then you're saving everybody a little bit of effort, which is helpful, I think. So now that we've done that, we can remove the legend because we've indicated what the colors correspond to within the title. Some journals will give you pushback on this, but I just wanted to show you that you can do it, and you can have a play around with whether it works or not in your own context. The easy way to, there's lots of different ways to remove a legend, but legend.position equals none is the one that I find easiest to remember. So you can play with that, and then it's one less thing to read, it's one less thing to process, it's one less thing to think, oh wait a minute, what's this? You've got the information within the title, and then you can use it like this. So this is great. We've got it sorted. I think it's still a bit cluttered, so I'm going to change the line height of the title and the subtitle just to make them a little bit less cluttered together. There you encounter some fun subtleties that I talked about earlier. So Marquee does line height differently to how Element Text Box Symbols does it. It is something to do with whether we take into account I think the ascendants and the descendants. So the bit that sticks up above the H and the bit that sticks down under the G, whether they're taken into account when we calculate the line heights. I think the marquee version might be slightly more on the purist side in terms of typography, whereas the Element Text Box Simple might be more on the CSS side of things. Don't quote me too strongly on that, but basically they do different things. There is no straightforward way of figuring out what the way of reconciling these two are, so I suggest you just eyeball it. So have a play around, see what makes the line heights look similar to each other, and that will allow you to feel a bit happier about the way your graph looks. Because I think if we do this, it does the line height in the title does look a little bit too big compared to the rest. So it's a bit of a shame that there's no obvious way of calculating the difference between the two. Your other solution is to just stick within one system. To be fair, I've made it more complicated here by jumping between marquee and element text box simple. But I just wanted to highlight this in case you come across it and aren't exactly sure what's going on, because that was my situation probably about 2 hours ago. So we've got that sorted, and then we want to add some margins so that everything has some space to breathe. And here we encounter a further issue. So I've added a bit of margin around the graph as a whole. The newer release of ggplot uses margin auto to apply the same margin in top, right, bottom, and left. Um, Otherwise, you can just use margin and specify 34 times, but margin auto kind of takes care of that for you. So we've got more space. If you have a look, we've got more space around the graph once we've added the margin in than we had before. We've created another problem though, in that we've got now the subtitle going in, overlapping with the title. This is another quirk of having combined marquee and element text box. There's no simple way of making this work every time. It's slightly easier if you just stick with element text box. You can select the adjustment, the kind of vertical justification of the subtitle and of the title. But for our case here, I'm going to just fudge it a little bit and say that we want the title to align to the top of the subtitle, and we're going to increase the margin above the title. This is going to cause us a slight issue on the next slide, but it's a fudge that does the job for us just now. So does everybody understand what we've done? We created more space around the graph, which caused a bit of a text wrap issue. So more text ended up fitting inside the graph, which kind of demonstrates nicely the wrapping situation. But we ended up with overlapping title and subtitle, and so we're fixing that by fudging the margins around them. It's not super elegant, but it demonstrates a few little things that we can play around with in our graphs. So we've got it working. Before I hand you over the theme code, so you can apply it to a different graph, we need to tidy it up because we've done a lot. Like this is where we've got to. So we've created a style, then we've got our graph going on here, and then the theming kind of starts here at line 72, and we go all the way to the bottom. And there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot going on. Now you do not want to be copying this amount of code every single time you create a new graph. That would be madness. And also would mean that, that situation where your boss comes in and says, I really don't like that font, or I don't like that text color. Can you change it? And you've got, 10 minutes before the meeting. You find yourself scrambling around, 20 different graphs with all this code to try and find how to change it. This is not the way to go. What you want to do is create yourself a nice little reusable theme function. So I'm going to create a theme licorice function. And it's basically just taking everything that we've done so far in the theme and putting it inside two curly brackets. That's all there is to it. It's nothing more fancy. You can stick with that if you want to. So we've got the opening of the function here. We start with theme minimal, we then modify it, and yeah, it does the job. We may have been a little bit overzealous with the stuff that we've deleted. So we got rid of the axis title, axis text. We got rid of the legend title, we got rid of the grid lines. You might not want to do that in every single graph. So I suggest we get rid of them from our overarching theme. And you can always reinstate them later if you want to. You can always keep building on the graphs that you're creating. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you can keep building on the theme once you've settled your graph as well. So we've got our theme function just here. We can be a bit kinder to ourselves and give ourselves a base text size argument to our function that we can then feed through our graph in various places. So the rel stuff still works. That still works relative to the text size that we've got. The only other places we need to put it in is in the margins. So it's quite helpful to have your margins be multiples of your base text size. So if you just pop it in here, then that means that if you're jumping between a GG saved graph or one that's in a slide deck or one that's in a different document, or if you're working for a paper that has very specific font sizes that it wants you to use, then you can just change your base text size in the function call and it will apply to your graphs nicely. So we've got the base text size sorted, and we can then apply that to new graphs. So here's a new graph with penguins, nothing to do with licorice. And we've got a graph that is unstyled, so a very basic ggplot. And then we just add theme licorice and ta-da, it looks so much nicer. All with just one extra line. So worth the effort, I would say. to invest in your own custom theme. The shameless plug here is that I love building them. So if this is something that you would like me to do, feel free to get in touch, and we can chat about what that would look like. But we've got our basic theme sorted here. Now we can still tweak it. We can add more stuff. So we can say, actually, I don't need the axis title on either of the axes, and I want to get rid of the major grid lines element this time. Looks a little bit cleaner. And it just demonstrates that just by having your own custom theme doesn't limit you in terms of continuing to apply the flexibility as and when you need it to different theming elements. You can also ask yourself the question of how much you want to bundle into your theme. You can, if you choose to, bundle in your scale color manual and scale fill manual. Essentially, what you do is you create a list, and then the theme function will just apply your theme and then the rest of the stuff that's in the list to your graph. So you can add more and more stuff to it if you want to. When I'm building these for clients, I tend to not include the scales colors inside it because I'd give them a bunch of different palettes. So we'll have a palette for divergent colors, a palette for positive to negative, a palette for maybe different topics that they're talking about. So I have tended to keep the colors outside of the theme, but it's very much possible to do this if you're building a theme just for one paper and you know that you always want to have sugar be pink and licorice be black, for example. There's nothing stopping you from applying this within a kind of expanded theme function that means that you can then just set the theme at the start of your document and everything will be generated with the colors that you've pre-selected for the different elements that you're plotting. So worth looking into if this is something that you think would be useful for your own setting. I thought maybe we could have a go at creating at looking at the themes. So I have created an extra bit of code that I can share with you if I can just find it. There we go. Have a go at that. So this should take you to a code gist that's got our theme within it. And you'll see the stuff in there that I've commented out because we didn't really need it. And if you use that theme licorice and apply it to oh, you lost my camera feed. You have lost my camera feed. Interesting. I'm back. How bizarre. Thank you for pointing that out. So if you take this theme here, you should be able to apply it to any graph that you want to create. And as we demonstrated, you can continue to build on it. So you'll have the same effect as we did here of a basic graph and then adding the theme to it, and it should work. What you won't necessarily have if you don't have Atkinson Legible as a font on your device, then you're going to run into an issue that it won't render the font as you expect it to. There is a bunch of solutions to that. One would be installing a font, which we're invariably going to run into some firewalls with that. Instead, you can try and figure out what fonts you already have installed on your system. So let me find the code that I need to pop into the chat to allow you to do that. You'll need to probably install a new package. But, oops. Always dangerous to do stuff live like this. But it'll be worth it. Okay, if you would like to check which fonts you have installed on your computer, or at least which fonts are as aware of being installed on your computer, the system fonts package is your friend. You'll need to install the system fonts package, and then you can use system fonts /on system_fonts, and that will generate a table of all the fonts that you've got installed, and then you can play around and see what they look like. And the bit that you want to use from that table, if you've managed to generate that table, is not the name column, but the family column. The name column typically doesn't have any spaces in it, whereas the family column does allow for spaces. And you can see from the code that we generated here that we are using font names with spaces in them, We're using the family for that. So if you don't have Atkinson Hyperlegible installed, you could try to install it from Google Fonts if you want to, or you could just have a look at what you already have on your device and go from there. I also did write a blog post about how to get fonts to work in R. If you Google getting fonts to work in R, you get there. So I'll also just copy that into the chat, and you can have a play around with some reproducible code, see what that does for you. And there's little screenshots of things to look out for, like what setting your graphics device to be the right graphics device, and all these kind of fun things that you only really find out when you create a bunch of graphs for different people and different clients who've got different fonts, and you realize that, yeah, there's always something fun that happens within all of that. So has anyone managed to play around with the theme and get it to work at their end from a basic graph doing something like this? Conscious that I have kind of just talked at you since giving you that extra bit of code. But as we've been saying, all of this is going to be made available on my website for you to revisit. So I will share a link to it, probably on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me at the moment. And I'm sure the organisers can update some information there if we need to as well. We've got our graph, we've got a theme. You can decide how much you want to bundle in. And I thought before we finish today, I would do something fun and make the graph interactive, mostly just to demonstrate how easy it is to do that. So if anyone's sitting on the fence with R and not sure what they want to do, and a little bit scared about the different functionalities and the stuff that we talked about today, this might be what tips you over into thinking, no, actually, I do want to learn how to do this. So you can make your graphs interactive very, very easily using a package called well, people call it different things. I call it ggiraf. I'm pretty sure I have heard the package creator call it ggiraf, so I'm going to stick with that. But you can call it ggiraf if you want to. Everybody calls it something different. There's lots of variations on it. We needed to give it some data to feed into the tooltips. We've not really got anything that identifies our patients, and we kind of want something like a name and maybe something nice to say about them. So I've used two packages. I've used the baby names package to just grab some names and try to assign them sensibly with our data, giving the female patients female names and the male patients male names. And I've also used the praise package, which if you haven't installed the praise package, please install the praise package for yourself, and then type praise praise and it will say something nice. It's just a lovely thing to do. Let me just do that at my end and then I can pop it there. There we go. It is the bee's knees. Excellent. So yeah, if you type praise, you should get a nice little message coming out that will be an encouragement. And so what I decided to do today was to use the praise package to generate some nice things to say about our patients so that we could pop that into the tooltips if we wanted to. So it's a kind of here's what I made earlier situation, just to give us some data. It's very silly, but it's nice. Look at this. We've got Ollie, who is powerfully great, and we've got Lee, who's calmly brilliant, and Sophia's swiftly luminous. It's fun, just something a little bit fun. So have a go at the praise package, mostly for your own entertainment, but it's been useful here to generate some data that we can feed into the tooltips in our data. So we've got the graph. This is the graph that we have. Nothing happening here, nothing interactive. All we need to do to make it an interactive graph is change geom_point to geom_point interactive. And then we need to give it something to put in the tooltips. So I'm going to give it the patient's name. I'm surrounding it by a tiny little bit of code here to make it bold. Then we're going to put the age of the patient in. put is, and then our little praise statement that we've generated in the data. Um, and I'm also giving it a data ID of the patient name. This is going to be useful later when we link this to a second graph. So we've got all our graph sorted here, and then what we need to do is feed it into gggraph giraffe. And we need to specify a few things like what we want to happen when we hover over a dot. And this is just, I'm saying it's just CSS. It is just CSS. Once you've got your head around it, there's really nothing complicated to it. So it's just writing a little bit of CSS. And the good thing about CSS is that people have been writing it for ages, so there's loads of documentation out there on how to do that well. And we need to tell it what to do with our tooltips, so how to style them. We've given it the background color that's our dark text color that's the background here that we've got, bit of padding around it, bit of letter spacing, giving it the font that we've been using around it, just specifying a few other options, and we have ourselves an interactive graph. So Kate 48 is generously gnarly. Not sure that gnarly is something I would necessarily have put as a compliment. Happily Kryptonian, there we go. Justly marvelous, that's quite nice, isn't it? And we've got Austin, who is swiftly awesome, and Byron, who is seriously riveting. So we've made our graph from something that was, just showing the overall patterns to something in which we can actually explore data about specific patients if we want to. So you could feed a whole bunch of stuff into your tooltips if you wanted to do that, and you have yourself an interactive graph. There's a bit, it can be a little bit fiddly figuring out exactly how you want to get it to work. You need to make sure you size it in the same way as you had done your ggplot. So the ggplot was given a specific height. Here we're giving the SVG the same height as the default height that I've set for my presentation. And exactly, so Martina's now pointed out that in looking at the tooltips, it looks like the older patients cough more. Possibly not necessarily though, but doing this does give you a little bit more insight into how other things that might be in the data that you might not have spotted in the first place. So yeah, there we go. We've got an 82-year-old, 81-year-old here who is openly Kryptonian and not coughing very much at all. So that hopefully, Martina, that can reassure you about the disparities. But yeah, Sylvester and Dennis both had a bit of a rough time after their operation. But yeah, adding a bit of interactivity just gives you more layers to your data. It allows you to put a little bit more behind the tooltips, and it allows you to work with people who really want to see the numbers without overwhelming them with the numbers. So Andy's asking me if the interactive features are included in a Quarto document. Yes, my slides are Quarto. So the interactive features are going to be in any HTML document. In a PDF, it would just be a static graph. But the good thing about it is that you could export this as a static graph and it would work. So you can put all the interactive stuff that you would need to make it interactive and still just save it as a static graph and it will look the same as it had done before. So it's really, really, really good for those situations where, for example, you're working with a client at the moment who have a Shiny app. We're doing some gggraph within the Shiny app, and then it will just be the static graphs in the PDF export from the app once people have filtered through and figured out what exactly they want to export from it. So it's just there's that versatility to it, which I think is really, really brilliant for what we want to do. We've got a question here. Have I tried with ggRepel? So ggRepel is a package that allows you to put labels on your graph, and it kind of pushes them away from each other so that they don't overlap too much. We could do, but we've got, I think, about 200 dots in here, so that would be a lot of labels. And I said earlier that we're wired to read. We do just naturally read anything that's put in front of us. So I think if you were to put all of those labels on, it would just be quite overwhelming for people to look at because there would be, hundreds of labels to see. You could give it a go if you've got data that's got fewer data points. That could work nicely for you, but I think for our purposes, having the interactivity is the best way to go. Ray is asking my thoughts about ggRF versus Plotly. So I've used both. Both have pros and cons. Plotly allows you to do a little bit more in terms of kind of zooming in on specific data points, the kind of brush selection that you can do. The downside I have found to Plotly is that I like to be quite precise. You like Plotly? Yeah, I like to be quite precise about the styling. And I find that Plotly can sometimes override the styling. So it can say, oh, let me just make it look a little bit different. And which, when you've spent ages getting the style to be just the way that you want it, is a little bit annoying. Um, so I think, and also there's a couple of, I think Plotly maybe is not going to be supported too much going forward. I don't quote me on that. Look at the documentation, but I think there was an announcement about Plotly and our and whereas GGRF seems to be, to me, more flexible in terms of the styling, and also seems to be, there's no stopping of the support with that, which is great. Um, and also I have found the GGRF creator to be really quite responsive to issues. So anything that doesn't quite work, report an issue and get a conversation going, and that's always been a really positive interaction. So that's also really nice. So we've got another question here from Martina about the background color of the hover labels. Yes, you can get the labels to be to have the color of the background that matches the color of the dots. I didn't do it here because we would end up with a couple of accessibility issues in terms of the contrast between the background and the text. So I think it was wiser here to stick to a default background color, but it's also an option if you've got two dark colors, then there wouldn't be anything wrong with doing that. So yes, you could have a go at that. Um, okay, we've got a graph, we've got it sorted. Let's start again. You're thinking, is she mad? We've only got like half an hour left. No, no, it's fine. It's going to be fine. We can fast track it. You know how to do all of this stuff. I'm going to create some timeline data that we can use to look at how, on average, people were doing 30 minutes, 90 minutes, 4 hours, and the next morning after the operation, depending on the treatment that they were giving, depending on whether they're male and female. This is showing it for just the mean across everybody. We've also got it here. It's got chopped off at the bottom of the slide, but you can picture what it is. It's got the gender, the name, the praise statement that we created, and then we've got whether the pain rating that they gave, and the treatment, and the timeline. So we've got data that we need to create something different, and you know how to do all these things. So you know how to do all this. The only stuff that's new, I think, is some of the faceting. So I'm faceting it by gender and treatment. We've got the female patients here, the male patients here. We've got licorice to the left, sugar to the right. And we've got ourselves a graph with some dots, which are here, Geom Jitter Interactive. And we've also got some lines that tie together the paths for specific patients. It's a little bit messy, but it was mostly just to show that these things are possible, and that once you know all the tricks that we've talked about earlier, you can do some fun stuff building on that. So we've got our dots, we've got our lines. I have deliberately put the lines before the dots, so that means that they're being plotted behind the dots, which will make the interactivity a lot easier. That if you hover on a dot, you're not going to get the label that corresponds to a line that's also going through that point. You'll just get the label that corresponds to the dot. So if you're doing any interactivity, think about what's in the foreground and what's in the background, because it's what's in the background that will determine in the foreground that will determine what goes into your label. So we've got the main idea for our graph here. We're going to style it. So we just added our little theme licorice. And I've removed the legend because we didn't need the legend position to be there. It's okay, but it's a bit messy. We've got some issues with the text overlapping, so we can continue tweaking it. And what can we do to tweak it? So we can add a little function into scale X discrete. And thank you, Claude, for giving me the regex, regular expression that I needed. Regex? I feel like it should be regex because it's regular, but I think people say regex. Anyway, we've got to basically say if you find a digit that is followed by a letter, then put a space between those two things and wrap it. So that means that we've got 30 minutes and then we're able to wrap because there's a space between the two. So we've got our axis text sorted. What else have I done? I've got rid of the axis titles. I've added in some titles that work a little bit better for us. I have switched round actually. I've put the female patients on the left, the male patients on the right, licorice on the top, sugar on the bottom, mostly because I wanted to be able to compare like for like in terms of timelines within each gender. And it was kind of easier to do it this way, to see the continuity of colour between the bottom graph and the top graph than it was to see the continuity of colour from left to right. If you're comparing, is the next morning colour the same on both of these graphs? You've got a lot of disruption going on in the middle, whereas if you place them above each other, you can kind of see a little bit closer what the continuity of colour is there. So we've tweaked it, and again, this is all stuff that you know how to do because it's all the same stuff that we've been doing throughout the rest of the workshop. Um, but there's one more thing I wanted to show you. So, well, actually two. This is the penultimate trick. The last one is really, really quick. So the penultimate trick is to do some facets with highlights. So how many of you have used GG Highlight before? Can I get a thumbs up from anyone who has used a bit of GG Highlight before? Not seeing many thumbs. I'll scroll through. Okay, so GG Highlight, well worth a look at the documentation. I'll just pop the name of the package. Oops, if I can type it into the chat. What GG Highlight allows you to do is to create different facets of your data. So like we've got here, but include all the data in the background so that you can see how each data set that you're highlighting compares to the data as a whole. This can be really, really good if you're looking at, how different groups have progressed in a timeline and you want to highlight that generally groups progress in this direction, but this group's gone in a different direction. If you keep everything in the background, it keeps everything to scale, and it also allows you to see very easily if there's something that's going against the general pattern in your data. So GG Highlight is a really fun thing to work with, but it doesn't play nicely with ggiraf. Thankfully, there's a new fun thing that we can do, which is to create some default geoms. So we can say by default, I want a point to have the light text color, and I want the outline of it to be white, and I want it to have shape 21, make it size 4, and give it a bit of transparency. So we're saying, giving it, having a default geom for our points. You could set this at the top of your graph and all your points would at the top of your document and not specify anything about your points and they would all follow this. But that's not the purpose for which we're going to be using it. We're going to be using it in the context of creating dots that work within our graph, within the different facets. So you can see it's subtle because it had to be because of the nature of the data. What I've done is I've added a point and I have made them all transparent. So the darker the point, I guess, is the more people that responded in that rating. I didn't jitter them because it was getting really, really messy. So again, this isn't necessarily for database principles purposes. This is more for ggplot features purposes that I've created this plot. But what you can do is you can put all the data in the background of your graph, and then you can see how the highlighted data compares to that. So you can see that the licorice data all sits at the bottom, but there were some data points at the top. And then when we're looking here, we can see that actually there weren't that many data points kind of in the low range towards the start of the timeline for the patients who were given sugar. But they tended to be kind of clustered higher up. So just having that data in the background, here it's a bit messy and not super helpful to be honest, but it's a useful feature that allows us to create facets where we can highlight how the pattern that we're looking at just now compares to the data as a whole. So worth looking into. The data is probably a bit complex here for it to really work super well. But the way that it works is that we add geom point layout equals fixed, and that fixes those points within each of the graphs. So it means that within each of the facets, we've got those points fixed. So we've got all the data there, and then we can overlay our data on top of that. So Beth, you're asking if you wanted to highlight people over a certain age, you could do that. Yes, absolutely. You could create a different variable in your data that would group people. So it would be kind of an age grouping variable. which you could do in terms of age ranges, or if you had a particular cutoff point you were thinking of, you could do that. And then you could facet your data by age range, so by the grouping variable that you've just created, and keep the layout equals fixed in the background, and then you would be able to answer Martina's question about whether the older people were coughing more than the young people in the data. Did that make sense the way I explained that to you, Beth? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, you can do anything with this. You can yeah, manipulate your data so that you've got the grouping variables that you need, and then you can create your facets on the back of that. So I said I was using this so that it worked with the interactivity. You're saying this isn't interactive, so we need to make it an interactive graph. We've got a timeline here, and here we've got the ggRF options that I've given it. I'm just going to pop these into I'll just pop it into the chat. Uh, that's not work. That's not copied the right thing. Let me undo that. It's copied a bunch of images in instead of copying the graph itself. So let me try that again. If I take this, it's because it's copied the stuff from the other side of the graph. Exciting. There we go. So that is the ggRF code that I'm using. I will pop all of this at the bottom of the code that I share on my website after the talk, but this allows us to have some interactivity going on. So we can see Aura 76 is tenderly epic. I'm not quite sure why they're appearing in two graphs, though. They shouldn't do. It must be that there's the same name appeared in both of them. So you need to be careful. That's a good example, actually. You need to be careful when you're creating your graphs that the tooltip ID that you're using to highlight to say what needs to be highlighted together is going to be unique to the thing that you want to highlight. So here I've highlighted by name. We must have a male patient who's also called Aura somewhere in the data, and that's why the two of them are getting highlighted. But highlighting it by name means that we're now highlighting all the data points that correspond to the same person. And so it's, again, subtle to see. Let me see if I can make it bigger. There we go. But you can see as you hover over it that it's highlighting all the points that correspond to the same person. It's filling in the path, which isn't ideal. You can play around with the fill or not. I did the fill so that we could see the dots filling in, but it's a fun effect. It might be better to just stick to stroke rather than fill. But again, this is all stuff that you can play around with in the CSS that's associated with your ggRF options. So, interactivity. Last trick for the day is to tie two graphs together. Super easy. What we need to do is use library patchwork. So what we can do is we've got our timeline graph here. We had our interactive cough plot that we created earlier. We've saved these both as objects. And then within ggRF, we can add these together. So adding the two graphs together, you can do this normally to create two static graphs, but if you do this inside ggRF and they have the same data ID, then what you get is two graphs that talk to each other. So if I highlight Dennis here, who is frankly first class, you can see that Dennis's pain rating path is highlighted in the second graph. In the same way, if we highlight Cecilia here, we can see where she was in the cough graph. We can see that she was here, and there's two of them there, which is why that looks different. There's two dots over each other. So yeah, it's a really handy feature if you want to be doing stuff where you're tying bits of data together. I did this for a client who were looking at the impact that their intervention had had on a group of people, and we could tie all the graphs together. So see somebody that hadn't rated the impact super highly in another graph, maybe it showed that there was a reason why that was the case, or vice versa, that maybe we could see people who tended to respond positively in this area, or people who'd previously struggled with this particular task. So having graphs that highlight together is really fun to do. You just have to be really careful about what your data IDs are. But it's a fun trick, and it's a lot easier to do than people assume it is. You've got your ggplot code and you think, I wish I could make interactive stuff. Actually, with ggRF, it's so much easier to do. than you thought it was, and you don't necessarily need to learn a new language. Now, that's not to say don't have fun learning new languages, but it's just to say you can do a lot within R. So if you're creating Shiny apps where people need to explore different things together, this is quite a useful thing to do. If you're presenting, at a board meeting and you need to be able to highlight, the overall pattern, and you want to just draw attention to the specific patient who had an issue that is worth looking at. So Viola is sharply great. She experienced more pain later on than before. So it's worth having a look at this because it allows you to have multiple layers in the stories that you're telling with your data. There we go. That's it. That's all the tricks, all the new tricks that I've learnt. And it's now over to you to see what you can do with all of this. As I said, I will be uploading the slides and all the final code for the graphs to my website. So if you go to cararthompson.com/talks, you will recognize the talk from that. Yeah, and I think what I'll do now is I will stop the share and invite any questions that you might have. If you came along with a graph that you want a bit of troubleshooting for, do give me a shout. That's totally fine. We've got a bit of time left to do that. So there we go. And thank you for listening and for all your interactions. It's been really fun. Andy, are you still? I can't see you on
I
the
am
screen, but
still
I'm
here.
assuming.
Yeah,
Excellent. Very, very
I'm
good.
still here. Yeah, thanks so much for this presentation. Lots of people are super grateful, and it looks like people were really excited about that last slide with where you can do the double interactive. Um,
It's fun. It's fun.
yeah, so yeah, this room will be open, until for another 20 minutes. And
Mhm.
so yeah, folks can keep working if they want. Yeah, but that's our time for today.
Brilliant. Do we have any questions that people want me to answer? Or are we all good? Ooh, what was my website? Good question. Cara Thompson, oops, .com. The R is not for R, the coding language. The R is that my middle name is Rachel and Cara Thompson was already taken. Um, but I have stuck with Cara R. Thompson across LinkedIn and Twitter in the good old days. I'm no longer there. And my website. So yeah, feel free to have a poke around the website and see what you can find. Anything that's there that you like, feel free to reuse for your own purposes. And if you want to get better at data visualization, I highly recommend getting involved with things like the Tidy Tuesday challenge. The 30-day chart challenge has just finished, and I recognized a few of your names from people who are posting stuff within that. But yeah, Tidy Tuesday is really good. Um, so yeah, have a go at playing around with all of that, and yeah, you should find some fun stuff. Oh, Andreas, you're asking if there's already a gist for the IRAF stuff. I didn't make one. Do you want me to do that just now? Tell you what, let's see. Can we create one live and see where we go? What code would I need to copy? I could copy that. That would be tying the two together. I think the one that's probably the closest to what you've got will be not the one where we started again, but the one where we made it all interactive. If I copy that code there and then find all of the windows that I have open in the world, because that's just the nature of doing these things. Let's try this. Yeah, I think that's worked. Give that a go. I will copy the link. Okay. So yeah, that should be the code that we used for the first graph, and then that will show you kind of how to do the stuff in the rest of it. And then if you want to, I'll maybe just copy underneath that how you tie two graphs together. Now I do have to admit that the code for the second graph, there was something about the rendering in Quarto that wasn't working, and I was running too close to the start time of the workshop. So what I did was I embedded I saved the interactive graph as an HTML object and then embedded it in the presentation. So that was the way to get that working. So if you find yourself in that situation where you've got the GGRF graph working well outside of your presentation, it's not working in your presentation, you can save it as an HTML element and then embed it in. And that's a very easy way to do that. So linking to graphs. There we go. I've just updated the gist with how to link two graphs together. So you've got that there as well. Kimberly has a good question. How did I get into being a data viz consultant full time? I had the privilege of being on maternity leave in a country that has good maternity leave policies, and so that gave me a bit of a safety net for trying it out. I did some work for David Keyes, who some of you might know as the guy who runs For the Rest of Us. He was absolutely brilliant to work for and taught me a lot about going into consultancy and was very generous with his time and talking about how he runs his business. And I just got a real taste for it and decided that I needed to needed to try it and see if it was going to work, and it did work, and it was it's been really fun. But yeah, Kimberly, get in touch, send me an email, and we'll sort out a coffee or something if you're coming to Edinburgh. It'd be really lovely to. It's always lovely to meet people in person. That would be great. Yes, and Ray's pointing out that the university has some of William Playfair's original graphics. If you get in touch with the university's special collections team, they might be able to organise a viewing for you if you want to nerd out and see what they look like. It's absolutely brilliant. And the special collections team did a really good job. I went to see them with somebody else who came to visit Edinburgh, partly because he wanted to see those graphics, and it was really fun. That was great. Raymond, did you see them as well? I know we chatted about it.
Yeah,
No,
and
everyone,
mind-boggling to see like, oh, that's the world's first pie chart.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And also, he took liberties with axes, and scales and truncations and all that kind of stuff that we're like, this is illegal. But actually, if it helps convey the story, sometimes there's a case for bending the rules. Um, yeah,
Is there
good,
someone
good, good.
specific that I should reach out to at the university?
It was all done by the special collections people, but I didn't organize it myself. It was the guest that I was meeting with who'd organized it.
Oh,
But Raymond might have some more details on that.
thank you.
Yeah, I just reached out to the special collections librarian, and if you have any kind of academic association, I think you can get in and see them. Incredibly nice, and surprisingly easy. So good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions that people had, or comments, or questions about visiting Edinburgh, or anything? Martini says you've been working on a Playfair ggplot theme. Very good. That's always a fun thing to do. It's funny actually how many times I do refer back to his stuff, especially the kind of import-export graph where you've got the ribbon of imports and exports that's colored conditionally depending on which is highest. Yeah, it's really fun seeing where some of that stuff came from and how useful it still is to have as a reference point.
It looks like we have one question. Someone says, I'm still unclear about the format that we can save the interactive graph. So PDF would still work.
Good question. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Andy. So the interactive graph will not be interactive if it's inside a PDF because a PDF is a static document. Um, but if you create a graph with all the ggiraf bits in it, so if you create a graph with, ggiraf geom point interactive instead of just creating it with geom point, when you come to export it, none of that interactive stuff will get in the way of your graph looking the way that it should do. It's just that you won't have the interactivity. So if being able to hover over the graph and have it do stuff is important, then you won't be able to do that within a PDF. But the versatility is that you can have it do that within an HTML document, and then the person that wants it in a PDF will get a static version, but it will look the same minus all the tooltipping. Does that answer your question? Yes. So an HTML file is the way to go. That would work. So you can either do these within an HTML document, which is essentially what I've done today. So my slides are all Quarto, and so they are HTML documents. You could do it within an HTML, page document rather than a slide. You can also export the ggRF as an HTML object, and then you can embed it in a website through an iframe, and that works well for you as well. The thing that you need to think about if you're embedding it in an external resource is the fonts that you're calling need to be called by the website, or need to be defined somewhere or hosted somewhere so that it can access the fonts. Otherwise, it might not look quite the way that you think it should. But you can do some stuff to help with that as well. But yeah, HTML file is the way to go if you want to have some interactivity. Yeah, so PowerPoint and interactivity, I don't think have a go. I think it's one of these things that feels like it should be possible, but I'm not convinced that it is just yet. Um, yeah, if you're creating a lot of presentations, Quarto is there's definitely a learning curve to it, but it's really fun with what it opens up for you. So that might be something to look into. I feel like PowerPoint should be able to embed an HTML object, but I don't believe it can. But ask Claude and see what Claude says, and you might get a different answer to me, which would be fun. When you're using Claude R, sometimes it's worth getting it to read the documentation again because stuff has been updated. And there's ways of getting our Claude to work within our positron and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just be aware that sometimes it's a little bit out of date in what it suggests, but it is still super, super helpful when you're getting a bit stuck on how to implement something. Any further questions? Oh, something else in the chat. Claude.ai. Um, or you can use Claude Code, and there's a whole bunch of people who are blogging about how to get it to work in different ways, different setups and different skills, and teaching it R skills and all that kind of stuff, which I actually haven't really looked into. But there's yeah, stuff is taking off. Um, I like it. I find it quite helpful. There's lots of stuff that I don't like about AI, but I think provided we're not trying to get it to come up with what things should look like, I think it can be quite helpful for helping us come up with how to get from the stuff that's inside our head to stuff that's coded, with all the safety rails that you need for that. But there's something quite neat about the way that, for me, I feel it's accelerating the creative side of things, that I can have an idea and test it out much quicker than I would have been able to previously, which is fun. Obviously, don't let it loose on data that it shouldn't have access to, so use it responsibly, but it's fun. Okay, well, Andy, I think if there's no further questions, should we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Again, thanks so much, Kara. I really appreciate your time. And then for those who are continuing on with the conference in about half an hour, for track B, which is the track that this talk was part of, there'll be another workshop called No More Copy and Paste, Parameterized Reports and Plots and Reports with R and Quarto. So continue on if that works for your time zone. If not, have a good evening and a good day, everybody.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Take care.